This is the Starship Enterprise, a human space exploration vessel whose main mission is to explore deep space, discover civilizations, and establish diplomacy. However, a major incident occurred one day when Captain Kirk discovered that a civilization on a planet was still in its primitive society, and a volcano on the planet was about to erupt. If the volcano erupted fully, the planet would be destroyed. Therefore, Kirk ordered the Enterprise to hide in the deep sea, then sent a team into the center of the volcano, hoping to use high technology to freeze the volcano. During the mission, an accident occurred when the shuttle transporting Spock broke its cable, leaving him alone. Meanwhile, Kirk was being chased by the natives and both jumped into the water, swiftly entering the Enterprise. They were discovered by the natives and had to leave quickly to avoid severe consequences. Meanwhile, the volcano erupted, spewing vast amounts of lava, causing the natives to flee in terror. They didn't understand why this was happening. Spock activated the cooling device, and when the countdown ended, he too would be frozen. The Enterprise couldn't transport him back due to signal interference from a strong magnetic field. Left with no other option, Kirk had to make the Enterprise fly out of the water. The natives saw it, and the sight of the spaceship ascending completely overturned their worldview. As the ship was close to the volcano, Spock was beamed back at the last moment, just as the volcano was frozen. While they saved the planet, they also made a grave mistake. A leader sketched the shape of the spaceship on the ground, deeply imprinting its appearance in their memory. Upon returning, Spock wrote an honest report, something Captain Kirk hadn't anticipated. As a Vulcan, their principles are unchanging. A mistake is a mistake. Although Kirk saved himself, the general was furious. A high-tech civilization appearing on a primitive planet and being seen by its inhabitants was too significant an impact. The general had no choice but to relieve Kirk of his captaincy and send him back to the academy to start over. In London, a senior official of the Starfleet was distressed because his daughter was diagnosed with a terminal illness and was close to death. The official and his wife were in constant tears. At this moment, someone approached him, claiming they could save his daughter. The mysterious person drew his own blood and immediately injected it into the girl's life support system, which soon showed signs of life. The help from the mysterious individual came with a condition. He wanted the official to come to the Starfleet's headquarters data room and send the entire database to him, after which an explosion occurred. Following the incident, the general urgently called a meeting with all senior officers, including Kirk. The mysterious man was named Harrison, and while it was unclear why he bombed the data room, he certainly couldn't be overlooked. Kirk found anomalies in the data during his investigation. Why would Harrison bomb a relatively unimportant data room? Perhaps this was just the beginning. According to protocol, whenever a significant event occurs, all senior officers must gather for a meeting, possibly Harrison's true scheme. As he finished speaking, disturbances arose outside. Indeed, Harrison's goal was to kill everyone present. Amidst the chaos, people died continuously. Kirk picked up a gun and fired out the window, but it was nearly ineffective. He then thought of a plan, tied a rope around the gun, and threw it at the aircraft's engine, finally causing severe damage to the aircraft. At a critical moment, Harrison escaped through teleportation. Many senior officials died, including the general who had promoted Kirk. Kirk swore revenge, and under comprehensive tracking, discovered that Harrison had fled to a place unreachable by Earthlings. Although the destination was unreachable, it didn't mean it was completely inaccessible. The planet was Klingon territory, and Klingon were enemies of humans. Harrison was clever. If humans went there to settle accounts, it would undoubtedly spark an interstellar war. However, Kirk didn't care about that. He didn't need the Starfleet. At this time, the general revealed that what Harrison had bombed was not just a data room, but an organization secretly developing defensive technology. The general also wanted to show the Klingon a lesson. They were too despicable. This time, Kirk could carry the newly developed photon torpedoes, which had a long range and were untraceable. As long as he eliminated Harrison, he was to return immediately. This was the general's strict order. Following this, Kirk began assembling his team, which now included an additional member, Carol, a scientist proficient in advanced weaponry. Unexpectedly, the chief engineer Scott disagreed with loading the torpedoes onto the Enterprise. He didn't know what was inside, and Kirk couldn't disclose the mission details, leading to a standoff. Eventually, Kirk reluctantly dismissed Scott, and once everything was ready, the Enterprise headed towards the Klingon planet. This time, their flight was with the intention of assassination. Midway, Kirk revealed the truth, believing that everyone on the ship would understand. The warp engine accelerated their speed, but halfway through, the engine room forcibly exited warp speed due to overheating of the warp core, necessitating the stop. It seemed that Scott's absence was significant. With 20 minutes left to the destination, Kirk decided to proceed in a small craft, taking Spock and his girlfriend Uhura with him. Before leaving, Kirk repeatedly instructed that if anything unexpected happened to them, they should immediately flee to avoid triggering an interstellar war. The 20-minute journey was brief, and as acting captain, Sulu broadcast a call to Harrison, warning him that dozens of torpedoes were aimed at him and he should surrender or be annihilated. This move was clearly meant to intimidate Harrison. They thought everything was flawless. But as they entered the target range, a Klingon warship quickly approached. Kirk and his team were pursued by the enemy, and their vessel, lacking offensive capabilities, could only flee. However, the enemy's ship was slightly faster, and it was only a matter of time before they were caught. Suddenly, Kirk spotted a gap ahead and tilted the ship to try to shake off the pursuers. However, when they emerged, several warships were waiting, and the enemy demanded that Kirk and his team disembark for trial. Uhura, who understood a bit of their language, tried to communicate that they were there only to capture a fugitive and had no intention of provocation. However, just as Uhura started talking, the other side grew impatient and attempted to kill her. At that moment, a person appeared in the distance. It was Harrison, who opened fire wildly. Meanwhile, Kirk and his team joined the battle, engaging in a life-and-death struggle. The Klingon weapons were no match for Harrison's advanced armaments. Even their warships were ineffective and were quickly annihilated. Harrison could have killed Kirk and the others, but he considered the broadcast about the torpedoes and had no choice but to surrender. A move that Kirk found incomprehensible given Harrison's strength. Kirk, infuriated, punched Harrison repeatedly, but Harrison did not retaliate, and despite Kirk's efforts, he was unharmed. Subsequently, Harrison was taken back to the Enterprise, and the doctor took his blood for analysis. They wanted to understand why Harrison was so strong. Harrison warned that if they ignored him, everyone on the ship would die. Kirk, being perceptive, took this seriously. Harrison then provided coordinates and asked Kirk to check what was at that location. Harrison also revealed that the torpedoes contained a shocking secret, suggesting they open one to see for themselves. This statement made Kirk suspicious. Leaving the confinement room, he immediately called Scott, asking him to check the coordinates. Although Scott had been dismissed, he still cared about the Enterprise and Kirk. He pretended to refuse but had already started moving. Then, Kirk decided to dismantle a torpedo, but since no one knew what was inside, for safety, Carol took the torpedo to a nearby planet to disarm it. With Carol and the doctor's efforts, the torpedo was finally opened, revealing a human inside, which surprised everyone. On the other side, Scott, piloting a small ship, arrived at the coordinates, where he found a massive mechanical factory manufacturing unknown objects. As they had never heard of this factory before, the doctor examined the cryogenically frozen people and discovered it was an ancient technology, obsolete since the invention of warp speed, meaning the people inside were at least 300 years old. They then confronted Harrison, who admitted he had placed the people there. He revealed he was over 300 years old, had undergone genetic enhancement training, and led humanity to end the World War. After peace was achieved, he and his group were deemed criminals, exiled to space, and cryogenically frozen. Ironically, after the destruction of Spock's home planet Vulcan, someone found Harrison and the others floating in space. However, only Harrison was awakened by the general, who then demanded Harrison's help in weapons development due to his formidable strength and agility. Unmatched by ordinary humans, the general's purpose in sending Kirk to the Klingon planet to eliminate Harrison was to provoke a conflict between the two sides, thereby sparking an interstellar war. Harrison, wanting to rescue his companions, had killed many Alliance members because the general had been threatening him. As they discussed this, a ship approached the Enterprise. Not Klingon but the General Harrison had mentioned. Within 3 seconds, the ship reached the Enterprise, and without wasting words, the general demanded Kirk hand over Harrison, or the Enterprise would be destroyed. The general was resolute, and Harrison was not to be trusted. Now, Kirk didn't know who to believe and could only order the ship to warp towards Earth. However, the general's ship was faster in warp speed, and no matter how the Enterprise maneuvered, it couldn't shake off the pursuit and was quickly caught. Facing powerful firepower, the Enterprise had no chance to retaliate. Seeing this, Carol tried to persuade the general, but he gave her no chance and teleported her over. At this moment, Kirk began to concede, taking responsibility for everything himself and asking that the crew be spared. However, the general had never intended to leave any survivors and prepared to fire. Just as the shot was about to be fired, the general's ship was invaded, and its weapon system was instantly disabled. It turned out Scott had infiltrated the ship and secretly disabled the weapon system. Kirk immediately thought of a counterattack, planning to join forces with Harrison to eliminate the general first. He wasn't sure what would happen if Harrison was released, but there was no better option at the moment. and Scott could only hold them off for a short time. Kirk's plan was simple: he and Harrison would remotely jump onto the General's ship and eliminate them from the inside, requiring Scott to precisely open the airlock, or they would be forever stranded in space. The flight was extremely dangerous, as they could easily collide with debris and veer off course, but they eventually landed safely. Meanwhile, Spock's father unexpectedly sent a video. Harrison was the most formidable enemy of the Enterprise, and his terror was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. They had to be very careful. Vulcan had paid a heavy price to repel him. At that moment, just as the General was preparing for a second attack, Kirk and his team arrived in time, gaining control of the situation, and Scott knocked Harrison unconscious with a shot. As Kirk was about to escort the General back to the Enterprise, Harrison woke up. With his capabilities, these people were no match for him, and he targeted the General without hesitation, eliminating him and then threatening Spock to launch the torpedoes onto the ship, or Kirk and the Enterprise would be doomed. Spock, heeding his father's words, could only lower the shields and carefully package all 72 torpedoes for Harrison to control. After receiving the torpedoes, Harrison transported Kirk and the others back to the Enterprise, planning to erase all traces of the Enterprise from space. He began to bombard the Enterprise with heavy fire. However, Spock had a backup plan. What he transported wasn't Harrison's people but a bunch of bombs. When the countdown ended, Harrison's ship was destroyed. Although Harrison was dealt with, the Enterprise was left without power and, caught by Earth's gravity, was rapidly falling towards the planet. The only solution was to enter the engine room and manually activate the warp core to restore power, a task that only Kirk could undertake, as entering the warp core meant exposure to radiation, a highly dangerous endeavor. Eventually, Kirk entered the engine room, successfully connected the warp core, and stabilized the ship, but he was infected with radiation and beyond help. Meanwhile, Harrison, surprisingly still alive, set the ship's course for the Alliance headquarters, planning a mutual destruction to erase humanity. The massive ship sped towards the ground, causing an unimaginable disaster. At that moment, Spock decided to go after Harrison, determined to eliminate him. When Spock was transported to the ground, he encountered Harrison fleeing, and a chase ensued on the streets. Meanwhile, the Doctor suddenly discovered revived small animals, realizing that Harrison's blood was the cause, and contacted Spock to obtain Harrison's blood, hoping to save Kirk. Subsequently, a fierce battle unfolded, and initially, Spock was no match, either being outrun or severely beaten. At a critical moment, Uhura arrived in time, continuously shooting to temporarily immobilize Harrison, allowing Spock to quickly subdue him. Eventually, Kirk was successfully revived, and Harrison fell into a deep sleep, never to awaken again. After complex repairs, the Enterprise was renewed, and Kirk continued to lead the crew on their explorations.